Hello, my name is Dr. Dan Leitch. I'm an associate professor with the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University and president of the Confederation of University Faculty Associations, British Columbia, CUFA BC. CUFA BC represents 5,500 academic faculty, staff, and librarians across our 5 research institutions: Roy Rhodes University, Simon Fraser University, the University of British Columbia, the University of Northern British Columbia, and the University of Victoria. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which CUFA BC's office is situated, and that we reside on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. We acknowledge our traditional hosts and are grateful to carry out our work on their land. We recognize inherent Indigenous land rights and title, and the implementation without qualification of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and our support for the 94 calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I hope that you'll take a second to reflect on the Indigenous peoples whose land you're watching from. So we're here today to present the winners of the 2021 CUFA BC Distinguished Academics Awards. Each year since 1999, CUFA BC honors the outstanding scholarship and public policy contributions of our distinguished academics. Academics whose research and scholarly activity have made significant contributions to the community beyond the academy. We believe that the ideas that flow from universities contribute in significant ways to the citizenry and the democracy of our community, our intellectual life, and our economy. The awards demonstrate the necessity and the vitality of public universities' research and scholarly activity. Each year, our winners hail from different institutions and disciplines and conduct research in very different domains. However different their work, they are united by a passion for rigorous and meaningful scholarship and for research that contributes to the broader public good. I am pleased to present the winner of the 2021 CUFA BC Ehor Boyanowsky Academic of the Year Award to Professor Enda Brophy. The Academic of the Year Award is named for CUFA BC president who created the Distinguished Academic Awards and is awarded in recognition of a specific, recent, outstanding contribution to the community beyond the academy through research and scholarly activity. The award brings with it the admiration of colleagues from across institutions, disciplines, geographic borders, and beyond, and is recognized with a commemorative plaque and a cash award. Professor Brophy joins us to talk about his research. Welcome.
My name is Enda Brophy, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Communication and an associate in the Labor Studies program at Simon Fraser University.
Fantastic. So can you start with a brief overview of your research interests for us?
Yeah, my broad area of research interest is the political economy of communication. That's the study of the power relations which shape our media and communication system. So things like who owns it, who controls it, how value is produced within it, what the struggles are within it, and the relationship between that system and society more broadly. More specifically, my interest is in the overlap between labor and digital technology. So how labor is changing in communication and media industries, but also how digital technology is reshaping work in the economy more broadly. And even more specifically than that, I have a keen interest in the way that workers are organizing collectively, both in media and communication industries and in additional industries more broadly beyond that, to address some of the very serious problems and inequities that they face, including utilizing digital technologies to do that.
So you're recognized for your work in understanding digital labor politics and disparities in precarious work. Can you tell me about the project you did with your students early in the pandemic that was reporting on food delivery platform work and the COVID-19 outbreak?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. The history of that project goes back to the beginning of my time at SFU. I started in 2010, and one of the courses that I teach regularly, labor, communication, and the media, is a fourth-year seminar which is cross-listed between the School of Communication and the Labor Studies program at SFU. In the first 5 or 6 editions of that course, the assignment structure involved dividing students up into 4 or 5 groups and having them pursue group research projects on the overlap between labor and digital technologies over the course of a semester. And what happened was that students would present the results of that research that they did at the end of the semester. And often I found that the results of that group research project were actually of a very, very high quality, that they involved empirical research. And what happened at the end of when that course was over was that that research project ended up on my hard drive gathering dust. And that fate made me sad and made me want to change the assignment structure a little bit. Around 2019 and very early 2020, I was also in conversation with Chuka Ejikam, who was then Director of Policy and Research for the BC Federation of Labour, and Patrick Johnson, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1518. And one of the areas of conversation that we had around that time was around the rise of platform and gig work and platform app-based work in Vancouver. And one of the questions we had was that given that this work was on the rise locally in BC, that we wondered why workers had not been engaging in collective organizing to the same degree here in BC as they had been doing elsewhere in the world, really across the world. I mean, in Europe, in England, in Latin America, in Asia, even in Ontario, app-based gig workers had been organizing collectively, putting on strikes, organizing demonstrations, forming unions. And we really wondered why things had been quiet out here in BC. So those 2 situations led me to rejig the assignment structure in that class so that we were conducting as a class a research project together from beginning to end of the semester. And what we chose to do was to research the experiences of work and the labor process and the opinions around collective organization of app-based gig workers in the Metro Vancouver area. So in the winter of 2020, we began to conduct that research. We began interviewing gig workers. We joined Facebook media forums for gig-based platform workers and conducting that research. And of course, 2/3 of the way through the semester, the pandemic arrived and all of our classes went online. And so we were forced to conclude that research project by doing interviews on Zoom. We fairly quickly decided that we wanted to recalibrate, or I guess pivot in the research project to look at the ways in which gig-based platform workers were responding collectively to the new situation that they were in caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we found was truly remarkable. Not only was there a great deal of distrust for these gig work platforms, but we found that there was a really moving degree of solidarity among these platform workers. Platform workers in fora would share tips for staying safe during the pandemic. They shared safety equipment. They often shared advice that amounted to, don't go to work. It's not worth risking your life to go to work, because of course these workers all of a sudden were on the front line in real life, but also in the public imaginary. I think the public began to really appreciate the important work and the very risky work that these people were doing. And so we gathered that research and we published the results along with the UFCW 1518, the BC Federation of Labour, and the Community Engaged Research Initiative. Those results were published in the fall of 2020, and they're out in the world, and I hope that they will be that will be the first of a series of research projects and reports that will come out of this course.
Fantastic. That's really exciting. I mean, there's a lot of things that as a faculty member, I'd like to unpack in that story. The relevance of that class for your students, to get them actually engaged in important research, right? The way that life always intervenes in our research projects, so that you have to pivot right in the middle of it to take advantage of the unique opportunities that COVID provided. What a fascinating experience for your students.
It was a learning experience for everyone, myself included. I would be lying to say that I wasn't fairly white knuckle through the whole process, given the fact that it was really unprecedented, certainly in my teaching career, to do something like this. And then, of course, the pandemic intervened on top of that. But I do believe that it was a very positive experience for students. They were able to engage in a research project from design to conception to execution to writing and then to publishing, along with several students who were the ones who were most involved. We co-authored an article for the Tyee in the fall of 2020 in which we publicized the results of those research and drew attention to the fact that the app-based gig economy here in BC merited the attention of locals, of local unions. And so I do believe that it was a very positive experience. I will say that it was a great deal more work than it would have been in its standard iterations, but it was also much more rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that, and the idea that the academic audience is important. Let's write our journal articles, but then to translate that to a public audience through publication in the Tyee, also testament to the quality of the work that you were doing.
Yeah, it really, I guess the project aimed to operate against a couple of conditions which feel fairly widespread within academia. The first is that the knowledge that we create within academia it often tends to end up behind paywall journals and thus remains inaccessible to the public, and the publication of that report, as small an example as it was, felt meaningful in that regard. And it also operated against hierarchies that are long established within the production of academic knowledge. So academics often, tend to not collaborate with undergraduate students, and that was an adventure, but also tremendously rewarding. In that there were students for whom I do believe that project had a significant impact.
Oh, I can't imagine it wouldn't. One of your nominators described your work as bridging theory-practice divide through labor research methodology. That your work, quote, empowers workers to confront challenges around precarious employment, inadequate pay, lack of benefits, barriers to unionization, and other concerns. So can you tell me about your project, Justice for Contract Workers at SFU?
I'm grateful to the nominator for those words, which I think are very generous. My involvement with low-wage workers on campus and their unions at my university goes back to 2017, at which time Simon Fraser University decided that it was going to recontract its food service work in its cafeterias from the company that was providing it at the time, Compass Chartwells, to another multinational, Sodexo. At that time, current laws around successorship were not on the books. And so food service workers on our campus were facing the very real prospect of losing their jobs, of losing their union, losing their collective agreement. And so along with a concerned group of faculty and students and staff members, I engaged in solidarity work around that prospect and helped organize efforts to support food service workers on our campus, including very well-attended rallies and a petition. And in the end, we were able to secure a commitment from the university that no jobs would be lost, that the union would remain the representative of those workers, and that the collective agreement would remain in place. And that was a tremendous victory, I think, and a highly gratifying experience to be a part of within my campus community. After the pandemic arrived, within those first few months, food service workers that I was in touch with reached out and let me know how things were going for them. And that was that most of them had been laid off. And the ones who were remaining were, of course, doing frontline work in a pandemic situation, and therefore were exposed to a potentially deadly virus. And I felt that given that around the same time, I was offered an opportunity to be a research in residence at the Community Engaged Research Initiative at SFU. I had an opportunity to think more deeply around my relationship as a researcher with the communities that I'm a part of and the communities that I am in touch with. And I thought that it would be of social value to look more closely into the effects that the pandemic of COVID-19 had on low-wage workers on my own campus. Given, of course, that these are the workers in my very own community, but also they're the workers that in many ways allow me to do the work that I do. And I felt that while there has been a fair bit of attention that has been given to academic labor and the degree to which academic labor is becoming precarious, and I don't want to suggest that that process is not important. That's a tremendously important process. The focus has been predominantly on intellectual labor that happens within the academy, and scholars have given a lot less attention to the other forms of work that literally make a campus work, right? So food service work, security work, and cleaning work, and other forms of low-wage work. And it felt like it was important to put together a research project which engaged those workers in my own community to get a sense of the ways in which their own working conditions and lives had been impacted by the pandemic. So through 2020 and 2021, along with a couple of really excellent graduate students in the university, Jade Ho and Lillian Deeb, and along with a colleague, John Calvert from the Faculty of Health Sciences, who's also involved in the Labor Studies program, we began to design a research project in collaboration with the unions that represent those workers, so CUPE 3338 for workers who are involved in cleaning services, and Unite Here Local 40 for workers who are employed in the cafeterias on our campuses. And we designed a research project which aimed to assess the effects of the pandemic on low-wage workers in our own community. And what we found in our initial research was that when we compared the collective agreements of workers who were performing this work at SFU for outsourced companies, so at SFU, workers who work in our cafeterias are employed by Compass Chartwells, who are the food service providers on our campus. And workers who do cleaning work, who are represented by QP 3338, are employed by Best Cleaning Limited. What we did is we compared the employment conditions and the wages and the benefits of workers at SFU whose work was outsourced to workers who were in similar job categories at the University of Victoria and the University of British Columbia, who have collective agreements and whose work has remained in-house. And what we rapidly found out in doing this comparison was that workers at SFU whose work was outsourced to third parties fared worse in every single respect. In wages, they do not make a living wage, but they are also structurally excluded from many of the benefits that faculty at SFU take for granted. So for example, if you work in a cafeteria at SFU, you can't send your child to our childcare services on campus. If you have a kid who's interested in going to university, you do not get a tuition waiver, which is another benefit that as faculty we take for granted. If you have a child, you cannot access, there is no EI top-up as faculty members are able to take advantage of. And so we found that on all of these counts, people who do low-wage work on our campus are not only making less money and not making really enough money to survive in the community that they work in Burnaby, but that they're also structurally excluded from all of these services that we take for granted. And so as a result of this, along with unions, we formed a coalition called Justice for Contract Workers at SFU. Justice for Contract Workers at SFU is a coalition of students, of faculty, of workers, of union activists, which aims to bring that work back in-house on our campus. And so since 2020, we have been very active in aiming to have that work brought back in-house. We have made the argument that it is not only feasible, but it is desirable. And to our credit, the university is taking that possibility into account. It is considering the feasibility of bringing that work back in-house. And we are optimistic that the university will make this decision, not because it's the affordable decision, but because it's the right thing to do. And because our university needs to do better by the low-wage workers that we all rely on to do our jobs.
Yeah, I think our administration has really taken an ethical imperative around issues of equity and diversity and inclusion. And I would generalize that to low-wage workers and precarious workers that are delivering these services. So I'm hopeful, along with you, that they make the decision to bring them in-house. There's a lot of, my understanding of the research is that there's a lot of value that the institutions get from workers who are treated adequately with regard to having a living wage, having the benefits like the ones that you were describing, such that even if it's more expensive initially, in the long run, having a satisfied, happy, energized workforce contributes a lot of value to the institution.
One of the most important conversations that our campaign has had in the last 12 months has been with the mayor of Burnaby, Mike Hurley, and who I'm happy to say has endorsed our campaign to bring food and cleaning services back in-house at SFU. And he shared his experience at the city of Burnaby, where over his time as mayor, they have brought some food service workers back in-house. And according to his recollection and to those of other city officials that I spoke to, the city has, quote unquote, never looked back. They have found that it is a little bit more expensive, but according to his account, they get far better service. they have happier workers, and it is in the end a positive arrangement for the city of Burnaby, because they know that a significant portion of the money that would have gone to corporate executives is now instead going to those food service workers, and that they have workers who are more secure in their conditions of employment. And so those workers at the City Hall cafeteria have joined workers in other City of Burnaby outlets who are employees of the city and whose work is, and who are represented by CUPE. And so conversations like that have really driven home the fact that you lose a tremendous amount by outsourcing this work, and that any money that you save, any money that public institutions save, is made off the backs of workers. And I think that as a public institution, I would hope that SFU would not want to engage in this practice and not want to make those savings on the backs of its own workers, and would recognize that this is ultimately not about a bottom line. It is about social justice, and it is about being the kind of egalitarian and democratic institution that we want to be. It's about being a university that respects everyone in its community, and that does not favor some workers over others.
And provides a model for the community of how to respectfully treat and recognize the labor that's made on its campus.
Absolutely. We are an important public institution in Burnaby, in the Lower Mainland, in BC. And I really think that we need to lead by example in our employment practices. And since 2020, our university has, to its credit, been driven by the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I feel like we have brought in a number of interesting and promising initiatives for faculty and for staff. But I think that part of what my work and activism has been focused around has been in making the case that equity, democracy, and inclusion needs to include lower wage workers on our campus, and that arguably EDI initiatives ought to begin with those workers. And so part of the research and activism that I have been involved in has been around highlighting the important work that these workers do, valorizing the work that they do, and making the argument that if we care about EDI as a university, and this is more than just words, then those workers need to be genuinely included in our community as actors.
Well, as a faculty member at SFU since 2005, I can certainly testify to the fact that I think you've made SFU as a community a better place for those workers to be employed and a safer and more supported community as well. So thank you for your work in that area and for taking your research and making sure that it's applied to change the lives of others.
Thank you.
So you have a strong record, obviously through this conversation, of engaging with community-based organizations and approaching research through a community lens. So at the time of your nomination, you were a researcher in residence, and you've spoken briefly about that with SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative. Why is it important to you to engage in community-based research?
So my time as a researcher in residence as a part of the Community Engaged Research Initiative at SFU allowed me the time and space to think more deeply about our relationships as researchers to the communities that we're engaged in and the communities that we are a part of. And one of the traditions that has made a lasting impact on my work has been that of co-research, or con ricerca, which is a tradition of research inquiry, often also referred to as worker inquiry, which was developed in Italy among Marxist scholars in the post-war era. And these scholars believed deeply that knowledge ought to be co-created between themselves and groups of workers because they were both a part of the same labor movements. So that tradition has had a profound influence on the way that I approach my own research, primarily in the fact that I believe that if research is doing really what it should, community engaged research or community based research is doing what it should, then that division, that line of division that tends to exist in academic research between those who do the research and those who are researched is challenged or it even disappears. And secondly, it is very important to me to begin to challenge the line of division that often exists between theory and practice or research and practice. So again, if community engaged research or co-research, as I like to think of it, is doing what it should, then the production of knowledge should be at the same time the production of activism and political organization. And that has really been one of the driving themes within my research.
That's fantastic. I think traditionally, right, we have, as academics, we're trying to inform the theory and knowledge base and inform our colleagues. And there's been that gap between taking that work and actually applying it in practice and making sure that it makes meaning more broadly. So in thinking about the work that you've done, how has that been received by your peers? How's that received by your colleagues?
I think mostly positively. I think my colleagues have been very supportive of this kind of work. I mean, I have been recognized with this award, which comes from my colleagues, and I'm deeply honored by it. I think that there is a thirst within academia to begin to question traditional models of academic production, of knowledge production, and to begin to try and imagine different ways to produce knowledge and to circulate that knowledge once it's generated. And so my sense is that my research has been well received, and that has been gratifying for me as a scholar.
And the communities in which you're doing your work. So thank you for that commitment.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I think that that community engaged research, if you want to call it that, or co-research as I refer to it, it can be really challenging because it takes a lot longer to produce. I think that's one of the key things that I have found in my career, given that you have to build up those relationships, and the relationships come before the research. You cannot begin to do the research until you've developed those relationships, and those relationships can take weeks or months or even years to develop. And so what I feel like now is, for example, in my work on low-wage work in the university, is that I'm in a position to do that kind of research because I have developed relationships of trust with low-wage workers and their associations in my community, relationships that have taken years to build up. And I feel like it's only in recent months and years that I've been able to launch research projects on a solid footing of trust with those communities. And that trust is not only something that needs to be developed, but it needs to be maintained. And so it takes a tremendous amount of work, and I think that it takes a leap of faith to step away from that publish or perish, publish as much as you can academic model, and to move toward outputs that are hopefully higher in quality, but possibly fewer in quantity compared to other models of academic production.
So I'm curious, particularly when you talk about research that takes time, relationships need to be developed, trust needs to be established. It brings to mind a lot of the principles around research with Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples. Can you talk a little bit about how your research relates to the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
It's a really good question. My research does not deal with Indigenous topics explicitly, but I do think that it is important to point out that the labor markets that my research explores and critiques are essentially hand in hand with a system of settler colonialism. They are a part of what I think of as the monstrous legacy of settler colonialism. And that is because they're really part and parcel of a broader system, which is the capitalist economy, which is a tremendously exploitative and destructive economic system. And so I think making the link between those two systems is important in research. In my professional life, both in my administrative capacity and in my teaching, my goal in recent years has been to make greater space for Indigenous perspectives and topics and themes, both within the curriculum that I teach, but also now that in recent years I've been graduate chair in the School of Communication, and so I have been involved in efforts to bring Indigenous themes and the perspectives of Indigenous scholars to make space for them within the curriculum of the graduate program in the School of Communication. We have made a commitment as a program to decolonize our curriculum and our relationships with each other. And that is a long and difficult path, but we are engaged on it, and I'm proud of us for making that commitment. And finally, I would say, personally, my commitment has been to listen and to learn and to try and to be a good ally to Indigenous people and to their movements, and to be of what help I can and to offer whatever support I can to those decolonization efforts.
I think you've clearly, your research has made a significant impact on the lives of people in British Columbia. Can you talk a little bit about the type of impact that you see your research making on British Columbians?
In recent years, my research has begun to increasingly focus on the conditions of work and life of workers in British Columbia, in particular low-wage workers, whether it is food or cleaning service workers on university campuses, or whether it is platform-based gig workers in Metro Vancouver. My research has sought to illuminate those working lives, the working conditions of those people, and to draw the attention of students, of scholars, of policymakers, and others to the very real challenges and significant problems that those workers are facing. And so I feel like my research has aimed to bring the attention of the wider public to those, the working conditions of those people. In addition, one of the areas of research interest that I have is labor and collective organizing. And I'm very, very interested in the ways in which, say, platform-based gig workers are organizing in other jurisdictions, and to try and circulate information around the ways that those workers are organizing in my own context, in the hopes that workers in Metro Vancouver and in British Columbia will take up that example and begin to organize in order to collectively respond to the problems that they are facing. And so that's another way that I feel like my work aims to have an impact here in BC. And then finally, I think in my own small way, I like to think that my teaching has had an impact on the people of British Columbia. I have taught since 2010 hundreds and hundreds of undergraduate students, many if not most of whom go on to settle in British Columbia and to be a part of the social fabric of this province. And hopefully they have taken some of the ideas that they've encountered within the classroom and they have brought them to wherever they're at, and they keep them present, and hopefully that in its own small way has made an impact on the population of BC.
Given the way you engage them in topics of their interest and in application of actual research and information, I can't imagine that you haven't had a substantial impact on your students over time.
I hope you're right.
Thank you very much for joining me today to talk about your research. And again, I'd like to congratulate you on being awarded the 2021 CUFA BC Ehor Boyanowsky Award for Academic of the Year, and being part of our Distinguished Academic Award series.
Thank you. I would like to thank my nominators who spent time writing some very touching letters in support of my nomination. They are very busy people and they do very important work, and I really appreciate the time that they took out of their working lives and their projects to support my nomination. I also want to support the people at SFU who helped in putting together that nomination package. I was surprised to find out the formidable nomination machinery that our university has, and I'm very thankful to those people for helping shepherd that nomination through. And finally, I would like to thank the folks on the adjudication committee, the BC CUFA adjudication committee, who saw it fit to give me this award. It's very, very meaningful for me because it comes from my colleagues, and that's one of the most important communities that I work with.
Great. And again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.